She even had the 13 and 14-year-old neighbor kids helping her with the abuse of this 16-year-old girl. The case we're talking about today is very tragic, and it does involve a 16-year-old girl, so if that's not for you, I'll see you in the next video. Hey friends, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the tragic case of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was born on January 3rd, 1949 to Lester Likens and Elizabeth Francis. She had two older twin siblings, Diana and Dennis, who were 2 years older than her, and two younger twin siblings, Jenny and Benny, who were a year younger than her. It's important to note that Jenny had polio when she was a kid, which made her weak and gave her a bad leg, so Sylvia was known to always watch out for her and take good care of her. Now, Sylvia's family was from Boone County, north of Indianapolis, and they were very poor. And by 1965, Sylvia's mother, Elizabeth, was in jail for shoplifting, and her dad was working with a carnival, which meant he was traveling a lot. Lester, Sylvia's dad, needed a place for Jenny and Sylvia to stay for a couple months while he was working. Diana, their older sister, was already moved out, and their brothers were staying with their grandparents at the time. There was a woman named Gertrude Benizowski who had two girls in the same school that Sylvia and Jenny went to, and Lester felt that she would be a good fit to watch Sylvia and Jenny because she had 7 children of her own. He agreed to pay her $20 a week to watch them, and he dropped them off in her care. Now, Gertrude Benizowski was 36 at the time, but you would think she was much older. She was very frail, she was asthmatic, she was a heavy smoker, and she was also very depressed. She had 3 failed marriages and 2 miscarriages, one of which was recent. Gertrude Benizowski lived in her house with her 7 children in Indianapolis. She lived with Paula, who is 17, Stephanie, who is 15, John Jr., who is 12, Marie, who is 11, Shirley, who is 10, James, who is 8, and Dennis, who is 1. Gertrude was also very poor. She lived in this house that didn't even have enough bedrooms for her own kids, and she had to struggle to make ends meet. Gertrude's house was also a place where the neighborhood kids was frequent because she didn't care if they drank or smoked or did drugs or had sex or whatever. And so that's also important to note. Now, Sylvia and Jenny had to share a room with Shirley, Marie, and James, and this room had 1 mattress on the floor that they all had to share. Lester was not aware of this, though, because he didn't see the whole inside of the house when he made the agreement. The first couple of weeks went perfectly fine. They were getting along with Gertrude's kids, and she was taking good care of them. But after the first 2 prepaid weeks, the payments started to show up late or not at all. The first time the payment showed up late, Gertrude was very upset because this was how she had to pay rent and pay for her kids to eat. And so she took Sylvia and Jenny to her room, and she yelled at them, and she ordered them to pull their pants down, and she spanked them. She told them that she had just spent 2 weeks taking care of them, all for nothing, and she was very upset. Now, the payment did show up the next day, but however, I feel like this was the first time that Gertrude realized she could take her anger out on these kids that weren't hers and that it felt good for her. And this is where the cycle of abuse started. It's also important to note that Paula, Gertrude's 17-year-old daughter, was pregnant at the time, and the child was a grown married man's child. Yeah. Now, Sylvia was very pretty, she was very smart, and Gertrude and Paula were very jealous of Sylvia, and the abuse started being mostly directed towards her. Sylvia would get beat, she would get spanked, and one day Sylvia and Jenny got bottles from the trash and went and exchanged them for money. They used that money to buy candy, and they brought it home. When Gertrude saw it, she accused them of stealing, and even though they tried to explain what they did, she took them and she spanked them with a paddle. Sylvia was the one who received the majority of the abuse, perhaps because Gertrude felt bad for Jenny because she was weaker and younger, or perhaps because Gertrude was jealous of Sylvia. Sylvia started to be starved, beaten, forced to eat feces and excrements, and she was even beaten by Gertrude's own kids, including Paula, who was the worst of them all. One day, Gertrude overheard Sylvia telling one of the other kids that she had a boyfriend from Long Beach, California. Gertrude asked Sylvia if she had ever let her boyfriend touch her, and Sylvia admitted to Gertrude that she had. Gertrude then got infuriated, and she called Sylvia a prostitute, and she didn't allow her to sit in a chair anymore. She would force her to ask permission, and then she beat her. Sylvia was very upset by this, so she apparently started a rumor at school that Paula and Stephanie, Gertrude's daughters, were prostitutes themselves. Stephanie had a 15-year-old boyfriend named Roy Hubbard, and when he found out about this, he went over to Gertrude's house and he beat Sylvia up. Gertrude started encouraging her own kids and the neighborhood kids to beat Sylvia up, burn her with cigarettes, watch her get beaten up, all of this sick stuff. And one time, Gertrude even made Sylvia pull down her pants in front of everyone and insert a glass Coke bottle inside of herself because she wanted to show everyone what kind of girl Sylvia was because she believed she was a prostitute and a whore. Sylvia had a best friend named Anna Cisco who was 13, and Gertrude went to her and told her that Sylvia was calling Anna's mom a whore, and so she took Anna to Sylvia and let her beat her up. Gertrude also told one of Paula's friends, Judy Duke, who was 12, the same thing, that Sylvia was calling Judy's mom a whore, and so she took Judy, a 12-year-old, to go beat up Sylvia. Gertrude once ordered Jenny to beat up Sylvia, and when she refused, she beat Jenny until she agreed to punch her own sister in the face. And Paula one time punched Sylvia so hard in the face that she broke her own wrist, and when she got a cast for it, she used the cast as a weapon against Sylvia. At one point, Gertrude gets new neighbors, Phyllis and Raymond, who move in next door, and they have kids of their own, and they're interested in Gertrude babysitting them since Gertrude is watching Sylvia and Jenny and has 7 children of her own. So they invite Gertrude over to meet up with her and get to know her. And when this happens, they see Sylvia with a black eye, and Paula straight up says to them, "I did that," and then goes and pours boiling water on Sylvia, and Phyllis and Raymond say nothing to anyone. Again, 2 months later, Phyllis goes over to Gertrude's house to get something, and she sees Sylvia again with another black eye, and Paula again says, "Yeah, I did that. You want to see how I did it?" And then she takes a belt and starts beating up Sylvia in front of Phyllis, and Phyllis again doesn't report it, doesn't say anything. How crazy is that? One day, Sylvia told Gertrude that she needed gym clothes for school, and Gertrude told her they didn't have the money to get any, and so Sylvia had to steal some from school, and when Gertrude found out, she burnt Sylvia's fingertips with cigarettes. And then Jenny one day had to steal a shoe for her good foot, and when Gertrude found out about that, she pulled both the girls out of school and stopped letting them go. Sometime in September, Jenny and Sylvia are with Marie, one of Gertrude's daughters, at the park, and they see Diana, their older sister. They can't tell her what's happening, but Sylvia does tell Diana that she's hungry, and Diana gives Sylvia a sandwich. Marie then goes and tells her mom, Gertrude, what happened, and Gertrude is so mad, and she beats Sylvia, and she gives her a hot, scalding bath, so hot to the point where Sylvia passed out multiple times, and each time Gertrude would slam her head on the wall to wake her up. A couple weeks later, Jenny and Sylvia see Diana again, and this time they do tell her what's happening, and Diana thinks that the girls are overreacting or exaggerating. Sometime after this, a man called Arsenal Technical Schools, the school where Jenny and Sylvia had gone to, and told them that there's a girl at the Benazowski house who has sores on her face and looks like she might be abused. Since the girls hadn't been in school for a few days, they send a nurse to the Benazowski household, and Gertrude tells her that Sylvia had run away, that she was a troublemaker, and that the wounds were because of bad hygiene. Somehow the nurse believes this and accepts it and doesn't say anything to anyone. Judy Duke, the 12-year-old who was told by Gertrude that Sylvia was spreading lies about her mom, went and told her mom what was happening to Sylvia, and Judy's mom said, "Good, that's what happens to naughty girls." On October 1st, Diana finds out where the girls are staying and goes to Gertrude's house, and Gertrude refuses to let her in and threatens to call the police. So Diana hides off to the side until she sees Jenny come out, and she asks Jenny what's happening. Jenny says she can't tell her because she'll get in trouble, so then Diana calls social services. Social services comes out, and Gertrude tells them the same thing she told the nurse, how Sylvia ran away and she was a troublemaker and this and that and whatever. And somehow social services again believes her, and they even make a note in their system that they don't need to go out there anymore and that it's all clear and good. Like, what? Isn't that crazy? She was in the house the whole time. At this point, Sylvia wasn't allowed to use the bathroom, so she had started wetting herself and having accidents, and this made Gertrude even more mad, so she kept her in the basement, and she was often tied up naked and alone. Ricky Hobbs was a neighborhood boy who was 14 at the time, and he was known to be a good, smart kid, and somehow Gertrude had convinced him to be kind of her own henchman, and some people think maybe she seduced him, but he started doing whatever she wanted. He would help abuse Sylvia, he would help beat on her, he would watch it all happen and not say anything. Gertrude and the kids would rub salt in her wounds, make her eat her own excrements and feces. They would beat her up, they would burn her, they would do all these terrible things to her. At one point, Sylvia told Jenny that even though she knows she doesn't want her to, that she is going to die. And Gertrude eventually makes Sylvia write a letter in her own handwriting, and this is what the letter said. To Mr. and Mrs. Likens, I went with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and they said that they would pay me if I would give them something. So I got in the car and they got what they wanted. And when they finished, they beat me up and left sores on my face and all over my body. They also put on my stomach, I am a prostitute, I'm proud of it. I had done just about everything that I could to make Gertie mad and cost Gertie more money than she's got. I've tore up a new mattress and peed on it, and I've also cost Gertie doctor bills that she really can't pay, and made Gertie a nervous wreck and all her kids. Gertrude even started charging the neighborhood kids 5 cents to come beat up on Sylvia or watch her get beat up or come see her laying naked in the basement floor. One day, Gertrude was especially angry and she pulled Sylvia up from the basement and tied her up in the kitchen. And she tells her that because she branded her daughter, she was going to brand her. She was talking about when Sylvia started a rumor that Stephanie and Paula were prostitutes. Gertrude then takes a hot needle and starts carving into Sylvia's stomach. She gets 2 letters in and then hands the needle off to Ricky, and this 14-year-old boy brands the words, "I'm a prostitute, I'm proud of it," into Sylvia's stomach. Like, how crazy is that to think about that happening, let alone a kid doing it to another kid? On October 25th, Sylvia overheard Gertrude telling her kids that she was going to leave Sylvia in the woods to die. So Sylvia tried to escape, but she couldn't get out the front door because she was so weak, and Gertrude ended up beating her with a metal curtain rod, and she beat her to the point where the curtain rod bent in half. And then one of the neighbor boys, who was also using Sylvia for his own judo practices, came and finished beating her with the curtain rod. John Jr. then brought Sylvia back to the basement, tied her up, and forced her to eat what was in Dennis the baby's diaper. Sylvia tries one more time to escape, and she finds a shovel in the basement and starts banging on the walls and the floors. And one of the neighbors even ended up reporting to the police later that they heard the banging coming from the basement, but they had heard it stop around 3 a.m., so they did nothing about it. Then Sylvia is taken by Ricky and Stephanie to get a bath and get cleaned up, and when she's in the bath, she says, "I wish my daddy was here," and then she stops breathing. They try to give her CPR, but they fail, and Gertrude at first says that Sylvia's faking her own death, but she eventually realizes that Sylvia has actually passed away. Gertrude calls the police and she hands them the letter that said that Sylvia ran away with the gang of boys, but they search around the house and they find Sylvia laying on the mattress, passed away. Dr. Charles Ellis did the autopsy on Sylvia, and this is what he found. He found over 100 burns, 2nd degree and 3rd degree, all over her body. She was severely emaciated. She had bruises of all kinds of ages. She had brain swelling, she had nerve damage and muscle damage, and her vaginal cavity was swollen almost to the point where it was shut completely. Now, the official cause of death was internal brain hemorrhaging, brain swelling, and shock. So all of the trauma and stress of this abuse eventually caused Sylvia's death. In May of 1966, trial began against Gertrude, Paula, Ricky, John, and Coy. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty for all of them, even the minors. Now, the Gertrude's lawyers were trying to put it all on the kids, but Marie, her daughter, who was 11, went on the stand, and even though she at first tried to cover up for Gertrude, she eventually said, "God help me," on the stand, and then confessed to it all. Gertrude was sentenced to life in prison, but she got out in 1985 on parole even after all the protests. She then moved to Iowa, changed her name to Natalie Van Fossen, and denied everything, and she died 4 years later of lung cancer. She also got the nickname Mom while she was in prison, which is really twisted. Paula had her baby during trial and named her Gertrude, and then she was convicted of 2nd-degree murder, but got a second trial and pled down to voluntary manslaughter. She only ended up spending 3 years in prison before moving to Iowa, changing her name, and getting a job as a teacher. Yeah, she was a student aide for kids with special needs. Luckily, someone submitted her actual identity to the school and she got fired. Ricky, John, and Coy were all convicted of voluntary manslaughter, but they only got 18 months in juvie. And I think that's also really unfair, just like this whole case. Anyways, that is the tragic case of Sylvia Likens. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe and like button, and comment down below what other true crime cases you want me to cover next. Bye, friends.